I am Cassidy, 34 years old, living in Chicago, and if anyone had ever told me that family was where you could find unconditional love, I would not have believed it. My family is an institution, a system of traditions that does not allow for exceptions. My father, Robert Parker, is a man everyone admires and respects. He built his career from scratch, starting as a lowly engineer and eventually rising to CEO of a leading aerospace company. The company is not just where he works, it is his life, his everything. My two older brothers, Mark and Nathan, were always the stars of his show. Mark was a distinguished soldier, becoming a commanding officer in the Army, while Nathan ran the engineering department of our family company. Both were married, had children, and lived lives that my father would praise. Family dinners were always filled with laughter, and Cassidy was the only one who didn't get a place in the conversation. I was never the son my father wanted me to be. In his eyes, I was just a mistake, a piece that didn't fit into the perfect family picture. How could I be a part of this family when I never fit into the mold he had set for us? Looking back on my childhood, I always felt like an outsider in my family. I never participated in sports. I was not the first one to be praised by my father for receiving scholarships or achieving excellent results. Instead, I daydreamed about the universe, the distant stars, the visions that no one in my family shared. Every time I saw my brothers playing soccer or joining the Boy Scouts, I could only stand by silently, feeling that I was never good enough. My father was always stoic, quiet, and sometimes even cold. He didn't need to say anything. The way he introduced my brothers at every family gathering was clear enough. This is Mark, who was just promoted to captain. Then Nathan. And this is Nathan, who now runs the advanced testing department at our company. Then he turned to me with a wry smile. This is Cassidy. She's creative. And then he turned away, continuing to talk about my brothers without mentioning any of my accomplishments. It felt like a knife to my heart, but I learned to swallow it, not to let anyone see me weak. When I was 11, I built a model rocket from recycled materials. It flew, and my mother was proud of me. But when I brought it to my father, he shook his head, his eyes full of doubt. "Are you sure you didn't steal these parts?" The question stabbed me like a knife. My father could not treat me with the respect I craved, and I knew that to him, I would never be a worthy son. I was not just a girl, I was a failure in his eyes. A failure that he could not acknowledge, but instead, he assigned to me words like creative, different, words that he used like an invisible arrow, piercing into me, judging that I was not manly enough, not strong enough to become a successful man like my brothers. Still, I didn't give up. I kept trying, and I succeeded. I graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering, a major accomplishment that I knew my father would never acknowledge. All he sent me was a simple text. "Congratulations. Didn't realize today was the day." A short, cold message. No involvement, no pride. Still, I continued to work hard. At Caltech's propulsion laboratory, I was one of the brightest young professionals. And then, at 31, I became the youngest female technical director in the institution's history. But despite my success, despite my efforts, I was still invisible to my family. In my father's eyes, I was never good enough. I told myself that I needed to try again to do something special to make him notice me. But all my efforts seemed like a small wave in the sea of indifference. Once again, I became the woman who was not recognized, and I wondered if I could ever find a place where I would be accepted, truly loved. When I think back to my adult years, I realize that there are moments when you can accept failure. But there are also moments when that failure comes from the very person you expected to have your back all your life, and everything falls apart. And for me, those failures started at home. My father was the only person in my family who had a profound influence on me. He was a stoic man, and I always felt that I could never do anything right in his eyes. My mother loved me in her own way, But that love was often overshadowed by my father's coldness and silence. Every time I achieved something, no matter how small, I would seek his approval, but the answer was usually just a cold shrug. I can't count the number of times I told myself, "This time, Dad will be proud of me." My hopes and dreams were like little streaks of light in the dark sky. I wanted him to see me the way he saw my brothers, proud and happy. But he didn't. I learned that, to him, I was just a mistake in the picture of a perfect family he painted. It makes me wonder if I am truly the only one who feels the pain of this lack of recognition. Some days I sit back and ask myself if I am trying in vain. Can I change myself to fit the mold my father created? Or will I forever be a stranger in my own family? I remember my high school days when I started to show my difference. While my classmates were crazy about football, I was immersed in books, passionate about science, space, and technology. I often sat in the corner of the classroom, reading magazines about space, things that no one in my family cared about. Actually, I didn't care what others thought of me. I just wanted to find a little joy in the things I loved. But when I won science competitions and prizes, my father did not congratulate me, did not pat me on the back. Instead, he shook his head and said, "That's nonsense, Cassidy. That won't help you build a solid future." Those words pierced my heart. My mother remained silent. She understood my pain, but did not have the courage to protest against her husband. When I entered college, I worked twice as hard to prove myself. I was accepted to Stanford University on a full scholarship, an accomplishment I was incredibly proud of. But when I told my father the good news, he simply said, "Congratulations. But that scholarship won't help you if you don't find a real job to support yourself." I had hoped that when I successfully graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering, my father would acknowledge my efforts. But as usual, he did not attend my graduation. Instead, I received a text message from him. "Congratulations. Didn't realize today was the day." I had to tell myself that I no longer needed his recognition, but it was hard to accept that my own father, the man I believed would always have my back, did not properly acknowledge any of my achievements. When I got the offer from Caltech's Rocket Propulsion Laboratory, where I would start working right after graduation, I was excited. This was a huge opportunity for me, a huge step forward in a career I had worked so hard to achieve. But not once did my father ask me how I felt about the new job. All he said was, "Just keep going. Don't get distracted by meaningless things." Surely, when I say these things, many people will think that I am being too sensitive. But for me, these are wounds that cannot be healed. Every time I see my brothers being praised in the family, every time my grandfather encourages them in their work, I feel more and more like I am just a lost shadow in this family. Everyone thought I was successful, but for me, that success was always overshadowed by the things that my father never recognized. I thought about how to change, how to receive a compliment from him. But after a long time of struggling with my feelings, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I could never make him change his mind about me. And that was when I realized that I had to change. Not for my father to see me, but for me to see myself. I don't know how naive I was, still hoping that one day my father would truly see me. But life is not like I thought. It's a truth I don't want to face, but it's time for me to accept it. When I turned 30, I started working at the Caltech Propulsion Laboratory. I could be proud of myself. The work I did was not only a great opportunity, but also a milestone in my career. What I learned, the work I did, was not only intellectually demanding, but also part of my identity that I had fought for. I was one of the few women working in a predominantly male environment, and that made me even more proud. But for my father, my success was not enough. While I received compliments from colleagues and industry professionals, my father sent a short message. "Congratulations, Don't forget to keep up the good work." That was all he could say. It was a strange feeling. It was like spending your whole life building a building, and when it was finished, the only person who could walk in wouldn't even look at what you had created. And then, one day, my dad announced his retirement party. It was a big event, held at the fancy Hilton, complete with speeches, awards, and a long slideshow of his career. He said I had to go, even though I didn't want to. But part of me, knowing full well what would happen, couldn't say no. The party was solemn, filled with familiar faces from my father's company, along with his old colleagues and friends. We sat at large banquet tables with white tablecloths on them, and vases of flowers placed all over the room, all shining under the bright lights. In that atmosphere, I felt like a ghost, pale and out of place. I stood in the corner of the room, watching everyone. My father's colleagues congratulated him, applauded, and I felt like an outsider. My father stood in the middle of the stage, looking around with a smug look. When he began his speech, I knew he would never remember me, no matter how hard I tried. Thank you," he began, his voice filled with pride. "I stand here today because of the support of my wonderful family. My sons, Matthew and Nathan, have always made me proud. Every step of my career has been tied to them." Every word he spoke emphasized the brilliance of my brothers, and I stood there, silently, feeling my heart sink. But I was wrong to think it was just a party. When he started talking about me, I hoped foolishly that he would say something different. But he didn't. He simply said, "Not all kids are good enough. And that's okay. My daughter never was good enough." Those words, in public, in front of a crowd, were a stab in my heart. Those words were not only an insult, but also the end of all the hope I had nurtured for so many years. The room fell silent, save for soft giggles. And then, glances turned to me, uncertain but suspicious. I knew, everyone understood in their own way, that I was just a daughter unworthy of being acknowledged by her father. They didn't need to say anything. Everyone understood. And at that moment, I decided that I wasn't going to take it anymore. I stood up, not out of anger, but out of a determination that had been building up inside me for years. I didn't want to disrupt the party. I didn't want to be the center of attention. But I couldn't let him continue to insult me. I walked toward him, holding a small, carefully wrapped gift. As I approached him, every eye in the room was on me. "Father," I said, my voice unwavering, "congratulations on your retirement. This is your greatest failure." I handed it to him, no explanation, no apology. Then I turned and walked out. As I walked through the crowd, the whispers and surprised looks made me feel like I was leaving a world I no longer wanted to belong to. Each step I took echoed in the silence, but none of it felt too heavy. I wasn't running. I was just walking. And that was all I needed to do. Leaving the hotel, I was in no hurry to go home. I didn't need to explain to anyone. I just needed to find a private space to escape that lie. I drove to a quiet corner of the city, turned off the engine, put my hands on the steering wheel, and sat in silence. My heart no longer felt pain, no longer felt the emptiness of disappointment. But this did not mean that I had forgotten everything. After the retirement party, after I left my family and never came back, something changed in me. I was no longer the girl who sought validation from the father who had abandoned me for so many years. But even though I was firm in my decision, there was a void in my soul that I could not immediately fill. I felt like I needed a change, something that could help me find the feeling that I could love myself without having to rely on others. And that's when I met Lucas. Lucas wasn't the person I planned on falling in love with. He wasn't the person my family expected me to be with. But in his eyes, I was a real person, not the shadow my family had created. He never looked at me as someone who needed to prove his worth. When I first met him at a space conference, I didn't think it was much more than a small talk, but he made me feel important. He loved the things I was passionate about. He didn't see me as part of some project, but as a person with real dreams and ambitions. Over the next few months, Lucas and I began to see each other more often. We shared a passion for science, space, and adventurous experiments. He always listened to what I had to say and never made me feel small. That, I think, was what attracted me. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone really saw me. My love for Lucas came from a common soul, a common passion, and a common understanding. However, my family did not support our relationship. My father always had a clear standard for the people I should associate with. He wanted me to marry someone with a social status and leadership ability, like my brothers. Lucas was not that type of person. He was an independent research scientist, without much ambition to build a reputation. That made my father unhappy from the beginning. Still, I couldn't deny the peace Lucas brought. He wasn't the person I'd imagined my life partner to be, but he understood me better than anyone else. But, like everything in life, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Our relationship had its share of challenges, and they didn't come from us, they came from my family. My father, with his stubborn personality, never accepted Lucas. Every time I brought him home, he just nodded with a polite smile, never initiating a conversation with him. He did not like people who could challenge his rigid views. He could not accept that his daughter would love a man who did not have the ambition to build an empire like he did. And with each time, I felt myself being pulled back, as if my family and all their expectations were holding me back, not giving me the chance to live the life I wanted. The tension between my father and I increased when, one day, during a family meal, my father openly criticized Lucas. He said to me, without any restraint, "Cassidy, you can't spend your life with a man like that. He won't take you anywhere. He won't help you get further. Don't you see?" Those words were like a punch in the face. I couldn't bear it when he publicly belittled my choice like that. Although I loved Lucas and felt his true love, I felt like I was caught between two worlds. One of Lucas's love and acceptance, and the other of my family, where I was never good enough. After the confrontation with my father, I left the house and went to see Lucas. I needed comfort. He listened to me, as usual, but this time I couldn't contain my emotions. "You know, my father never accepted us," I said, my voice breaking. "He never thought I deserved what I had, what I was building, and now he doesn't even want me to be with you because you're not who he wanted me to be." Lucas didn't respond right away. He just kept quiet, as if trying to process what I had said. He took my hand and looked into my eyes, then said, "Cassidy, I love you for who you are. I love your dreams and your resilience. We don't need anyone else's approval. You just need to believe in yourself." I knew then that Lucas's words were true, but it wasn't easy. I had to decide if I was willing to give up my family to love freely, if I could live a life without asking anyone's permission, not even my father's. That question had been swirling around in my head for weeks. I couldn't live in the darkness of lack of validation. My relationship with my family was too fraught, and I realized that in order to love someone like Lucas, I had to love myself first. And that was something I had never done. After the tense events of my father's retirement party and the confrontation with him, I decided that I could no longer live in the shadow of my family, no longer live for the approval of a man who never truly saw me. Although my relationship with Lucas had its challenges, I realized that true love is when you can choose yourself, even in the face of hardship. I can no longer wait for my father to change. My life journey has proven that no matter how hard I try, he will never understand me, will never acknowledge what I have done, what I have achieved. Every time I try to prove my worth to him, I only feel more tired and useless. No matter how successful I am, in his eyes, I will always be an aberration, a part that cannot fit into the perfect picture of his family. When my father invited me to his retirement party, I immediately declined. Even though I knew that not attending would make him sad and disappointed, I couldn't bear his hypocrisy and insults any longer. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that decision, couldn't stop wondering if I had done the right thing. I didn't want to face him, didn't want to continue to indulge in expectations that would never match my own. After many nights of thinking and conversations with Lucas, I decided to return to Austin, where I grew up, to get clear with myself about the path I needed to take. I wanted to look back at everything I had built, everything I had fought for, and most importantly, decide that if my family couldn't accept me, then I wouldn't want to continue seeking their approval. I remember my college years, when I had no one to support me. I was the only one struggling to achieve everything. I remember the times when my father just brushed my achievements aside, the times when he didn't acknowledge me as a part of the family, just because I wasn't the perfect one in his mold. Those were the times when I wondered if I had the strength to continue living a life like this, a life where my family's recognition was the only thing I sought. After the retirement party, I couldn't go back to my old life. The career talk, the compliments from my colleagues, none of it could make me happy without my father's support. So I decided to cut off whatever was holding me back. Not because I didn't love my family, but because I loved myself more. And I knew that if I continued living the way I had, I would forever be part of a family that would never see me as I truly was. One Sunday morning, I woke up early, packed everything to leave the city. I don't know if my father understood why I did that, but I knew this was the best decision for me. Not because I hated him, but because I had to learn to love myself before expecting love from others. And this, I couldn't wait any longer. I decided that I wanted to live a new life, not just leave my family, but not depend on anyone's approval, not explain why I am this way, or why I do that. I wanted to live the way I felt was right, on the path I chose, and that was the only way I could feel truly free. This time, I did not turn back. I decided to go my own way without looking back, without asking for anyone's permission. I had the courage to walk, so as not to be torn between family love and personal passions. Everything in this life needs balance, but sometimes you have to be strong enough to let go of things that no longer serve your development. I returned to Los Angeles, where I had built my own career, where I found the strength to start over, without my father, without the unreasonable expectations of my family. I was on my own. And those days of living without the fear of being judged, were the happiest of my life. The decision to leave home was not an easy one. Sometimes I wondered if I was doing the right thing. My family had always been a familiar place. Dinner was filled with stories about work, about my brother's achievements, about the decisions my father had made. But there was never a place for me in those conversations, never a place to talk about my achievements without being discredited. When I decided to cut ties with my family, it wasn't because I hated them, but because I loved myself more. Those years had worn me out. I couldn't keep living in the hope that one day my father would change, that he would see me as I had strived to be. The meaningless conversations, the gentle taunts about my difference, all made me realize one thing. I didn't need to wait for his approval anymore. I don't regret my decision to leave, but I still have to face a difficult reality: my father's retirement party. He had been preparing for it for months. It was a big event, with hundreds of people from the company, former colleagues, and friends. He had always been proud of his career and believed that on this day he would be honored. But I couldn't go. Not because I didn't care about him, but because I couldn't bear the lack of recognition anymore. My mother still calls me, still texts me, telling me to go and make him happy. She always tries to convince me to come back, but I can't. I can't continue to be a shadow in this family. I can't continue to live waiting for compliments that I know will never come. I can't continue to live in a family where I am not seen, not appreciated for my true worth. And then one day, after I had made up my mind, my father called me again. Not for a friendly chat, but for the retirement party. He said, "Cassidy, we can't do this. This is an important day in my life, and I want you to be there." His words made me think, but soon I realized that I wasn't going to change my mind. The party wasn't important anymore. I had learned to let go. I knew that if I didn't attend, there would be anger and blame, but I also knew that, after all these years, I needed to take some time for myself. That's why I decided not to attend. As the party approached, my mother tried to persuade me again. She told me to try, just this once, to make my father feel complete. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't live my life trying to please everyone else. And I couldn't continue to play the role of a daughter my father wouldn't be proud of. And then, one afternoon, I got a call from my father. Not a call asking me to attend his retirement party, but a final call. "Cassidy," he said, his voice slightly changed. "I know you're not coming, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, even though I've never said it." The words surprised me, and I could feel a change in my father's heart. But that didn't change the fact that I had decided to live my life without seeking his approval. On the day of my retirement party, I woke up early, ready for a day of peace, free from the worry of having to face unmet expectations. I found freedom in letting go of the things that held me back, and that made me feel light. But what I didn't expect was that on that very day, my father sent me a gift. A simple gift, but full of meaning. It was an old photo, a photo of us when I was little, when I won a science competition. On the back of the photo, there was a message from him. "This is a moment I am proud of you. No matter what, you will always be my beloved daughter." These words could not erase all the previous hurts, but they made me feel that, even though he didn't show it, he recognized what I had done. At that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't need tears anymore. I didn't need to wait for belated apologies from my father. I just needed to accept that we all have our own pains, and sometimes, the truth about love in the family is not always expressed perfectly. That night, I spent time alone, not at parties, not in any conversations with my family. Instead, I asked myself about the next steps in my life. I learned that I can't always change the people around me, but I can change how I see myself, and that is freedom. Not long after I left home, things began to fall into place in my life. I can't say I was ready to fully step out of the darkness, having dealt with the trauma that had consumed me throughout my formative years. But I realized that if I didn't, I would forever be stuck in a cycle of validation and a desire for validation from people who could never truly see me. The first few days after I left home, I felt like I was living in a different world. I didn't have to endure awkward conversations with my father. I didn't have to pretend to be happy when he praised my brother's successes without acknowledging any of my own. It felt like I was freed from an indescribable burden. But at the same time, I was faced with an unprecedented sense of loneliness. Even though I no longer had my family by my side, I still had to face myself. During the long nights when I lay alone in my apartment, with no one by my side, I thought a lot about my decisions. Was I doing the right thing? Where would this choice take me? I can't deny that it was heartbreaking to leave my family behind, but I knew that if I didn't do it, I would never have the true freedom I wanted. And that was my goal. Freedom, not just from my family, but from the expectations I had endured for so many years. I decided to stop attending family gatherings, not because I hated them, but because I needed to stand on my own 2 feet, to define my own worth. The more I tried to prove myself to them, the more I felt like a child, forever unable to grow up in my father's eyes. I couldn't accept being invisible in my family forever. However, this decision was not without consequences. I knew that my family, especially my father, would never forgive me for this. My mother still tried to contact me, sometimes through brief messages, sometimes through quiet calls in the middle of the night. She told me that my father was very sad, that he could not understand why I did this. She said that he still loved me, but did not know how to express it. And when I heard those words, I felt no pity anymore. I did not need his love in that way anymore. The love he had shown for so many years was just empty words, without real actions. And I could not live my whole life in that lie. Even though my mother tried to convince me to come back, I couldn't. I didn't want to continue living in a family where I wasn't loved and respected properly. The recognition that I had craved from my father for so many years was finally gone. I didn't want to continue trying to change anything in the family. It was a part of my life that I chose to leave. At the same time, my relationship with Lucas deepened. We went through many hardships and challenges together. Lucas was always the only one who understood me, loved me not only for what I was, but also for what I could become. He never compared me to anyone, never asked me to change to fit some model. He loved me for who I was. And that, although it seems simple, was something I never had in my family. We continued to live together, not because I needed a replacement for my family, but because I found myself in the love and support Lucas gave me. I realized that the freedom I sought did not come from leaving my family, but from loving and accepting myself. When I no longer needed my father's approval, I was truly free. As time went on, I began to realize that family is not everything. Yes, I had been hurt, but those hurts no longer haunted me. I began to understand that family can be a place of love, but if that love is not enough, you don't have to live in its shadow forever. I don't have to live up to the expectations my family set. I can live my own life, a life that I have complete control over, where I don't have to live for the approval of others. It was also during those months that I began to participate in community activities, conferences, and meetings with people who shared my passion. I participated in scientific competitions, presented my research. Every step I took brought me a sense of pride, not because of what others thought, but because I knew I had taken control of my life, had found the path I wanted to take. One day, while I was attending a conference on the universe, I received an invitation from an international scientific organization. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker at a major conference. This was an opportunity I had never dreamed of, and this did not come from the help of my family or the support of anyone else. It came from me, from my efforts over the years. I did not need to prove myself to anyone. I proved myself to myself. The months after I decided to cut ties with my family were a journey of self-realization, where I had to face myself every day. I asked myself many times if I was on the right path. Maybe I was still searching for something that I couldn't quite define. I no longer had my family by my side, no longer had the support I had longed for, but one thing I felt more clearly than ever. I didn't have to live the way others wanted me to. Every morning when I wake up, I feel a great freedom. No more calls from my mother trying to convince me to come back to my family. No more reproaches from my father. No more suspicious looks from loved ones who never understood me. Every morning when I wake up, I know that I don't need to explain anymore. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. That gives me a sense of peace that I have never had before. Lucas continues to be the only person who truly understands me. He is the only one who sees me as an independent person, not living in the light of anyone else. Although we have faced many challenges in our relationship, each time we face difficulties, we become closer. He is always the one who encourages me to follow the path I have chosen, without anyone's expectations. He never asks me to change, just to be myself. And that is what makes me love him more. I realized that my relationship with my family was not what I needed to feel complete. Yes, I felt inadequate, that I did not deserve the love and recognition of my parents. But when I was able to stand on my own, I understood that the love I needed came from myself first. Those years of living in the darkness of lack of recognition made me stronger, but also made me learn to truly love myself, without needing recognition from others. My work at the space lab continued, and I gradually became an important part of the scientific community. I no longer had to suffer from the feeling that I was not important enough in someone's life. I learned to choose my own path, not for my family, not for my father, but for myself. And that changed the way I saw myself. I was no longer the invisible daughter in the family, but a strong, independent, self-reliant woman who could forge her own path. One day, I received an invitation to an international space conference where I would be the keynote speaker. This was an opportunity I never dreamed of, but it came to me because of my tireless efforts over the years. I have no one to thank but myself. There was no one behind me, no one who helped me achieve these achievements except my own perseverance. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly living for myself. When I stepped onto the stage, facing hundreds of people, I no longer felt nervous or insecure. My words were no longer bound by the expectations of my family, of my father. I spoke about the research I had done, the advances in the field of space, and my long journey to get to this position. And most importantly, I spoke about myself, about the things I had to overcome to be able to stand. Now I am no longer the lost girl, no longer the daughter that my father never acknowledged. I am a strong woman, standing on my own 2 feet. And I know that I can go further, without waiting for anyone's recognition. When the conference ended, I received a lot of compliments from the attendees. They said that I was an inspiration to many young women, especially those pursuing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Those compliments made me feel strangely happy, not because I received recognition, but because I knew that I had chosen the right path for myself. A few weeks later, I started receiving invitations to meetups, workshops, and educational programs for women in STEM. I was no longer the bystander, no longer the quiet one behind the spotlight. I was the leader, the inspirer, the change maker. I started writing articles about my career, about what I learned, about the challenges I overcame. They were published in scientific journals, and they gradually spread. I could not believe that someone like me, someone who had been forgotten, could become an inspiration to others. But I could not deny that after all, I had found myself. The change in me came not only from achieving success, but also from no longer being afraid of rejection, no longer being afraid of not being loved. I learned to love myself and accept that recognition is not the most important factor in life. The most important thing is that I can live a life true to myself, without needing to wait for recognition from anyone. So I left. I severed my family ties, my unfulfilled expectations, and started to build a new life. With each steady step, I felt that I had truly changed. But even though I had left my family, I could not deny that the years of growing up under my father's shadow, the shadow of unreasonable expectations, still lingered within me. They did not disappear immediately. Freedom did not come so easily, and I realized that this journey was not just about seeking recognition from others, but also about accepting myself. Even though my work at the space lab was progressing, and I had achieved things that many people would dream of, I still faced internal challenges. For too long, I lived with the feeling of not being good enough, not being worthy enough. My father never directly said that I was not good enough, but the way he saw me as a deviation in the family, said it all. It was ingrained in me for so many years. Now I had to learn to free myself from that hurt. Those sleepless nights, sitting in my apartment, I wondered if I was on the right track. Did I do the right thing by leaving my family behind to live for myself? Would I regret it? These questions, no matter how hard I tried to avoid them, kept lingering in my mind. But one thing I knew for sure was, I no longer wanted to live a life just for the approval of anyone, be it my parents or my family. The most important thing was that I could live a life that was truly mine, not someone else's shadow. Lucas is still the only person I can share everything with. He is not perfect, but he is the one who understands me, loves me for who I am, not for what I can do or achieve. He always reminds me that I don't need to change for anyone, not to please people who don't understand me. Every time I have negative thoughts, when I feel insecure, Lucas gently reminds me of the strength I have. He is the only one who makes me feel that I am not alone, that I am worthy of love and respect. Our relationship continued to grow, and I realized that, even though I had moved away from my family, I could still build a family of my own. A family is not a place where you have to follow strict expectations, but a place where you can be true to yourself, where love is not something to be sought from others, but something to be given and received in mutual respect. I feel that I have found peace and happiness in Lucas's love, in the work I am passionate about, and in myself. As the months passed, I realized that the work I was doing was helping me establish my place in the scientific community. My lab colleagues began to recognize my contributions, not because of who I was in my family, but because I deserved them. I no longer had to chase recognition, no longer had to worry about whether my father would be proud of me. I was creating value for myself, and that was the most important thing. At a major scientific conference, I was invited to be the keynote speaker. This was an opportunity I never thought I would have, but also a moment I had prepared for throughout my journey. Standing in front of a crowd, I did not feel nervous or afraid. I had lived my whole life to please others, but now I stood there, proud of who I was, of what I had overcome. I did not need to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to share what I had learned, the valuable lessons from my own life. When I stepped on stage, I didn't just see a woman speaking to a crowd. I saw someone who had overcome countless challenges, someone who had stood up after every fall, someone who refused to give up despite being underestimated. And when I talk about my journey, I'm not just talking about science, about space exploration, or about career achievements. I'm talking about perseverance, about finding yourself, about learning to love yourself no matter how many people don't see your worth. My speech not only resonated with the conference attendees, but also went viral online. I received compliments from many women in science who felt like me, who had been overlooked, who had felt inadequate. Those stories made me realize that my journey was not just mine, but the story of millions of others who were also searching for acceptance and freedom in their lives. My mother finally called me. After months of not speaking, she found the words. "Cassidy," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't know, but I've always loved you. I'm sorry I couldn't do better, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you." Those words didn't make me cry. Actually, I didn't cry anymore. I didn't need belated apologies from her or anyone else. But I could feel the change in my mother. And that was enough to make me understand that sometimes people don't always show love the right way. But that's no reason not to love myself. I never imagined that one day I would be standing here, a confident woman, no longer having to prove myself to anyone. The years of living in the shadow of my family, under the strict and expectant gaze of my father, are now a thing of the past. And when I look back on my journey, I can't help but feel proud. Not because of the successes I have achieved, but because I was able to stand firm, be true to myself, and no longer have to live under the pressure of a family that doesn't understand me. But even though I had left my family and found freedom in work, in love, and in myself, there was still something inside me that was not completely at peace. It was not the lack of love from my parents, but the abrupt end of the family relationships that I had placed so much hope in. The question still lingered in my mind. Had I done the right thing by cutting all ties with them? In the weeks after my international conference talk, I began to receive messages from my mother. Her first messages were always gentle, as if she was trying to salvage a family relationship. Her apologies no longer hurt, but they still troubled me. Even though I knew I would never come back, I couldn't deny that the loss affected me. One evening, while I was in the office working on a big project, my phone rang. It was my mother. A wave of confusion washed over me, and I pressed the answer button. "Cassidy," she said, her voice dry and different from before. "Dad wants to see you. He's talked a lot about you, about what you've done, and what you can be. He wants to apologize, and he wants you home." I sensed something different in her voice. Not the blame, not the ignorance as before, but a sincerity that I couldn't ignore. All my efforts to not go back, to not have to continue living in my father's recognition, now became a temptation that was hard to refuse. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to face my father, didn't want to go back to a family that I had completely abandoned. But part of me still felt like something was unfinished. After some thought, I decided to go back to Austin, not to please anyone, but to get it all out of my head. I drove home, the place where I grew up, the place that had witnessed so many sad and happy memories. When I arrived, the house was still the same, with the black iron gate and the rows of trees along the road. Everything was quiet, as if time had stopped. My mother greeted me at the door, as she had always done, with a warm but also anxious hug. She said nothing, but quietly led me into the living room. My father was sitting in an old armchair, holding a photograph. The sight reminded me of old photos from my childhood, when he used to look at me with pride. I stood before him, not knowing where to start. The apologies and explanations I had been expecting from him had not come in time, but I could not deny that I had been longing to hear them for a long time. After a moment of silence, he raised his head to look at me, his eyes no longer cold as before. "You've done so many things I never thought you could do," he said, his voice warm, no longer cold. "And I was wrong not to see what you did. I always thought you weren't like other boys, not strong enough to do great things. But I was wrong. You're someone I'm proud of." His words were like a knife to my heart, but also a relief. I had been searching for those words for years, but now I realized that no matter what he said, I no longer needed them. I had learned to stand firm and love myself without needing anyone's approval. These apologies, though belated, still made me feel a part of my heart was healed. "I don't need an apology," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I just need to know that I can live my life without living for anyone else. And I have." He said nothing more, just looked at me silently. It was a silent moment between us. No anger, no hatred, just understanding, however belated it was. After that conversation, I decided that no matter how much pain I had in my past, I was not going to let that hurt control my life anymore. I was going to continue on my path, and I was not going to let my family or anyone else stop me. My relationship with my father didn't have to be perfect, but I was able to accept that sometimes change doesn't have to happen the way you expect. And I knew that I was ready to move on. When I came back to Los Angeles, I didn't feel like I was running away from anything. I felt like I was entering a new phase of my life. I didn't have to go back to seek validation from my father. I didn't have to go back to prove myself. I found strength within myself. And that's the most important thing.